Standing still, or entering the idle position, is actually one of the most game-changing things you can do in Castle Crashers. Now you might be wondering, how is standing still game-changing at all? You can't move, you can't attack, you can't really do anything. Now standing still isn't actually the game-changing part, it's entering the idle position, and in some cases, not entering the idle position. Because when you go idle, it resets a lot of things. But before I show you all of those variables that it resets, I want to show you all of the ways you can enter the idle position, along with some of the ways you can avoid entering the idle position. So firstly, standing still makes you go into the idle position. So as long as you're not using any inputs on your controller, you'll go idle, unless of course you're in the air. Second, landing on the ground. Once you fall from the air and land on the ground, you'll experience land lag for a bit and then play the idle position for at least one frame. You can avoid going idle when landing if you use an attack or item on a perfect frame as you land. However, you will just enter the idle position when that attack is done. But if you use Bear or Saracen's Tornado on a perfect frame, you can avoid going idle when landing and when the magic attack ends. The third way to enter the idle position is by attacking or using items. You obviously won't be in the idle position while doing this, but as soon as you stop, you'll enter the idle position for at least one frame. So if you keep using light or heavy attacks, you can continuously chain them to never enter the idle position. Or you could also use a tornado after attacking to avoid the idle position, or you can use the light heavy light or light heavy heavy combos to fling yourself into the air without going idle. Also, if you hold up your shield and then use the horn, you can block an attack while blowing your horn to avoid entering the idle position after the attack has finished. Another way to go idle is by flinching. So if you get hit by an attack, you'll flinch for a bit and then stand idle after the flinching is done. But you can use an attack or a tornado during the flinching animation to avoid the idle animation. Or, if you hold up your shield and then get hit while you're still flinching, you'll block that attack and you won't go idle. Also, if you get frozen or stunned, you will go idle when the status effect ends. The next way to go idle is by using a tornado with the Bear or Saracen's magic. So when the tornado ends, you'll go idle as long as you're standing still. But if you hold any direction, you won't. However, if you use a tornado while airborne, you'll go idle when the tornado ends regardless of if you're holding any direction. And the only way to prevent the idle position is by using an attack on the same frame the tornado ends. Next, we have being beefy. So when you eat a sandwich, you will go idle when the transformation ends, and the only way to avoid that is by blocking a projectile during the animation. You will also go idle when you return to normal. Another way to go idle is by standing up. So if you get knocked over, when you stand back up, you'll go idle. But you can avoid this by getting stomped on by another player and then jumping into tech. If you revive another player, you and the revived player will both go idle when you finish reviving, and there doesn't seem to be any way to avoid this. Also, if you are on a ladder and climb off of it, you will go idle, unless you climb off at the bottom of the cliff in Tallgrass Field. Whenever you enter a cutscene, you will go idle, unless you are using a tornado or boomerang when the cutscene starts. In this case, you will just enter the idle position when the cutscene ends. If you grab a weapon, you will go into the idle position, unless you are in the air, and the only way to avoid this is by not grabbing a weapon. And finally, you will go idle when sitting on a mount. Even though it doesn't look the same as the idle position, it still functions the same. And now that you know all of these ways to enter the idle position, I'll show you all of the things that are affected by it, starting with death itself. So the way the game checks if you should die is if you have 0 HP and then enter the idle position. So if you get hit by an attack that makes you flinch and you run out of HP from it, you can use one of the previously shown methods to prevent yourself from dying. And if you have 0 HP and you're in the air, then you enter the idle position, you'll get Invincible Man. You'll just have to land on food to stay alive and keep the glitch going. The next thing that's affected by the idle position is tech. When you get knocked over by an attack, you can jump into tech, which will make you invincible to a lot of attacks. But you know how the saying goes, all good things must come to an end when you enter the idle position. That's right, when you go idle, you will lose tech. But you can use some of the methods shown earlier to prevent that from happening, like using a frame-perfect tornado to keep tech on the ground. Another thing affected by the idle position are combos. The only way for a combo to reset is by entering the idle position. So if you use 3 light attacks and then use a tornado to prevent the idle position, you can readjust yourself and then use 2 heavy attacks to use your elemental infusion and drill attack. Next, we have slow fall. If you use the jump level 2 spin attack, but then start using other attacks before the first one is finished, you'll get slow fall, which makes you slowly fall. But this also goes away if you enter the idle position. So if you get slow fall, you can use a frame perfect tornado to keep slow fall on the ground. However, jumping will also reset slow fall. So if you want to recall it after you've been on the ground, you'll have to use the light heavy heavy combo or the light heavy light combo. The grounded state is also affected by the idle position. If you're lying on the ground, you'll be able to get stomped and attacked by Hawkster. But once you stand up, you'll go idle and will no longer be in the grounded state. But if you get stomped and jump into tech, you can avoid the idle position and stay grounded. And the final thing that I could find that is affected by the idle position is water. That's right, if you enter the idle position during Rapid Ride or Catfish, and as long as you're not on a flotation device, you'll start to swim, which makes using the tornado on this level very buggy. And remember, all of this stuff only happens if you enter the idle position. So if you're already in the idle position and then get 0 HP, you'll have to leave the idle position and then re-enter it, then you will die. And for the record, the shield idle position does not reset anything, unlike the normal idle position. So this all happens for the player, but what about enemies? Well, enemies can enter the idle position in a lot of the ways that the player can, such as standing still, landing, standing up, attacking, and flinching. But there are also things that are affected by the idle position for the enemies, like death. Just like the player, the enemies will only die if they go idle or they die from a juggle. Enemies can also tech, which will only be reset by going idle. Sometimes an enemy will roll after they have been knocked over, and sometimes they will jump after they're done rolling. When this happens, the enemy will have tech until they land on the ground and enter the idle position. Enemy hit counters are also only reset by entering the idle position. So if you hit an enemy with a certain attack 3 times, the enemy will retaliate and hit you back. But if you hit the enemy only twice, then allow them to go idle, it will reset their hit counter, allowing you to hit them a 3rd time without them hitting you back. The grounded effect, which allows you to stomp enemies and allows Hawkster to attack them, is also only reset when the enemy goes idle, which is a big reason as to why the infinite Hawkster XP glitch works. And finally, the idle position resets flinched beefies. If you hit a beefy with an attack that would normally knock over a regular enemy, it will flinch the beefy, causing him to grab and throw you once he gets close to you. But if you can make the beefy go idle, he will no longer be flinched and will not grab you. A great video showcasing this is made by Cement Chewer, so go check that out. And that is a basic understanding of what the idle position is and what the idle position does. Thank you so much for watching, and figuratively speaking, see you next time.